Well, hello and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast with Marcy Nettles. I am so excited to have you joining us again this week for another fantastic story. These stories are all about individuals that found themselves in potential breakdown situations, and yet they did something different. They made a different decision. They made a choice to do something to get out of it and to have their breakthrough. And so I love sharing their stories because hopefully one of you will hear something in this story today that will be able to help you get on the journey towards your own breakthrough. So my guest today is Greg Barnsdale. He's an unusual undertaker. After years of stressing to others, get your final affairs in order, and finally publishing a book to inspire people, he was diagnosed with a large brain tumor. Faced with a death sentence, he opted for surgery. He's now emerged with an extremely compelling message shared by few others. His perspectives are unique as a certified financial planner, a certified executive advisor, and hospice volunteer. As a death doula who has published a best-selling book about planning ahead, his message is gaining solid traction. His claims include the fact that end-of-life planning helps reduce the stress of aging, improves family harmony, leaves survivors more emotionally and financially resilient, increases social capital, and improves court efficiency. This ultimately bolsters the economy. He believes confronting the reality of death also helps us live more fully. So I'm so excited to be able to welcome you to the show today, Greg. How are you?
I'm great, Marcy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so very welcome. Well, in our prior conversation, we decided that we were going to have the simple title of You're Dying, What Now for your episode. And so before we dive into the dying aspect of this, I want to hear a little bit more about your life. Can you please share a little bit more of who Greg is and maybe a little bit about what your 40-year career was like as a funeral director?
Well, I became a funeral director when I was actually about 20 years of age, and I worked in it for about 10 or 12 years and really enjoyed it. I didn't have any family in the industry. My parents and my sister thought it was rather unusual that I wanted to become a funeral director. But as I said, I learned so much from it, and it was so satisfying helping people out at the worst time in their life. And then over time, I developed an interest in estate planning. And then I shifted gears and became a financial planner. And it was interesting how I experienced in both the financial planning world, where I was helping people plan for the retirement and reduce the risks that could get in the way of a good retirement. Death came up again. And I just became frustrated with what I was seeing or what I had seen in both industries.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about why you went into that field in the first place as a funeral director. What drew you there?
My guidance counselor suggested it. I didn't have enough physics to become a helicopter pilot, which was my first choice. So I opted to become a funeral director.
Okay, and then after you had said that you had gained this kind of an urge to go into the financial planning aspect of it, what really kind of prompted you to kind of shift from?
Well, I was looking for a change, and my father had joined the financial planning industry, primarily in the mutual fund industry. So I maintained my funeral director's license and then worked as a financial planner. All my clients knew my background as a funeral director, and I ended up focusing in the area of estate planning, life insurance planning, and health insurance planning, and so on. But I just found it frustrating that in both industries that I had worked in, this whole issue of being proactive and planning ahead, having a will, having insurance in place, and even talking with our family about what we want to have happen when we die is such a taboo for some people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, and just looking back on my experience with my mom, because my mom passed away when I was only 20 years old. And she really, I mean, at first I was like so taken aback when she wanted to take me with her to pick out where she would be buried and to pick out what she would be buried in and to do, be part of all this process with her. It was kind of like it was hitting me in the face, first of all, that she was passing away. And so it was so hard. And yet now I look back and I'm like, you know what, Mom? Thank you. because she was doing me a favor, doing my siblings a favor so that we wouldn't have to worry about all of those things after she had passed away. And so I think that what you're doing now is such a blessing and a benefit for really everybody because we all have an expiration date. It is going to happen at some point or another. If you make good choices, you can prolong it a little bit, but it's going to happen. And so thankfully, you've written a book. The title of it is Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, Practical Advice from a Funeral and Financial Insider. First of all, why did you write this book and why is it important for everyone to read it?
Well, I wrote it attempting to find the best way, Marcy, to share my experiences with people. And I've tried a number of things that haven't worked. But I've always known that in some way I'd be able to somehow take my experience from the funeral industry and the financial planning industry and create something that was unique and that it would truly help people. In the financial planning industry, I met a number of people who were authors who gave presentations about retirement and all kinds of related topics. And I remember one author saying to me as I spoke with him after his presentation, and I told him about my background, he said, "Greg, there's got to be a book in you somewhere." And then it just really got me thinking that maybe creating a good, compelling book is the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think so too. So you had to have had a lot of experiences when you were working in the as a funeral director to where it wasn't necessarily set up very well. Can you share a couple examples of maybe part of the inspiration behind the book?
Yes, I I have seen all kinds of situations, Marcy, where families are fighting and arguing and not agreeing on what is to take place. Quite often, I had been making funeral arrangements with families immediately after a death had taken place, and they couldn't find the will or they didn't know what the deceased wanted, and they in many cases they were actually arguing right in the arrangement office, and it was terrible to see at such a delicate time in their family when they should have really been coming together to get through this time and leaning on each other. And in a fewer number of cases, I saw situations where the deceased had proactively planned. And when that was done, it made it so much easier for the survivors. And that's really what inspired me. As you said in the introduction, there are so many benefits to this. And it is true that more people are leaning into this and pre-planning now, but the statistics prove that there are far too many people that are still not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband and I were actually grief share facilitators for over a couple years. And some of the things that we really reinforce to people that were grieving is that, right after you have a loss, you should not be making big decisions, right? You should not be having to fixate on making those choices and things right afterwards because your mind, you're just not in a place to be able to do it because I mean, there's physiological things that happen when you're grieving, and part of that is that your brain goes into protection mode for you, and so you're not in a good position to make good decisions. And so having a family member go out of their way to plan so that you don't have to do that after they've passed, I think that is such a gift for the ones that are the survivors.
In my opinion, and it's a biased opinion, but I think it's a valid one considering what I've witnessed. I think being proactive and planning around what we want to have happen when we die is the ultimate gift of love.
Oh, I agree. That's a beautiful way to put it. Thank you. So from your expertise and what we're going to be talking about today, I want the What Now tribe to be kind of thinking ahead and maybe picking out specific things as we talk. So what do you think would be some of the biggest takeaways from what we're going to be sharing today for them to be listening for?
The most important thing that comes to my mind, Marcy, is having a current and valid will in place. The statistics continually portray the fact that roughly only about half the adult population in Canada and the US has a current and valid will. And I know a lot of people think, well, it's a hassle to set up and I don't know how to do it, etc. If someone's situation is pretty straightforward, such as they're not paying child support, they don't own property outside of the jurisdiction where they live, or they don't have interest in a business, if their situation is quite straightforward, they could even create a will online. And there are all kinds of will making platforms now available, which are very inexpensive, which is one solution. But it is best to get the advice of an estate planning lawyer, uh, because there's a number of nuances that need to be covered off, and to make sure that the will is going to be accepted by a court of law where you live when your survivors need it.
Yeah, yeah, that is so true. I think that when we're talking about this type of topic, a lot of the time, ignorance is one of the things that keeps people from doing the things that they should do. That they don't know where to get it right. And yet, we live in the day and age of technology to where you can Google that stuff and a lot of solutions will come up for you. And then you can go and you can sift and sort through the information to find what's right for you. Yet on the other side of it, I think there's another reason, and that is we don't like to face our mortality. We don't like to think about us dying. We don't like to even consider what is going to, I mean, it's like I already mentioned, it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen to you. You're going to die at some point. And so I think that those are two things that we just need to get over it and get out of our own way so that we can create this freedom for ourselves in our living, but also eliminate the stress of what could happen for our families afterwards. So I mentioned mortality and facing it, and you had an experience to where you had to face your mortality. I kind of mentioned it in your bio, but I would really love for you to dive into the story of when you were like all of a sudden that almost like a deer with a head with the headlights, right? Looking in the headlights and frozen. It's like, what happened when you ended up being diagnosed with a brain tumor? What led up to that? Why did you get diagnosed? Give us all the details, please.
Okay. It all started with the ringing in my left ear, which it is commonly known as tinnitus or tinnitus, I guess it is. And I had had this for some time, and my wife said to me, "Greg, you're not listening to me again." And although I think that's a guy thing, I said, "Fine, I'll go and get my hearing tested." And I went and got it tested, and I had suffered some hearing loss in that one ear. And then over time, it wasn't going away. And my doctor actually recommended that I go and get an MRI done. It was an ear, nose, and throat specialist that had suggested this. So a few weeks later, I went to see my general physician about a sore neck, thinking that it was just sitting at the computer too long, or being stressed out about trying to sell a lot of books and get this business off the ground and so on. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, "Greg, don't worry about your sore neck. You've got a bigger problem. You've got a large brain tumor." And I was shocked. I didn't know what to think of it. He didn't know. He's a generalist. He didn't know if it was cancerous or not. But he said, "I've got to call in to the ear, nose, and throat specialist that ordered this MRI a few weeks or months ago, and I'm waiting for a call back. So they'll call you to set up an appointment." So I went home thinking, "Oh man, this could be really bad," assuming the worst. And by the time I got home, the specialist office had already called me on my cell phone, and this was Thursday, and said, "Greg, can you come in Monday morning at 9 o'clock?" And I said, "Sure, I'll be there." So I hadn't even come in the house yet. My wife was working from home that day, but I thought for sure it was cancerous because they were asking me to come in right away. So I didn't tell my wife about this diagnosis all Thursday. I didn't want to ruin her day. And then I didn't want to ruin her dinner. And then I didn't want to ruin her sleep Thursday night. And then Friday, I didn't want to ruin her Friday. And I didn't want to ruin her Friday night. So Saturday morning, we're sitting in the living room having coffee, playing with our little dog and talking. And all of a sudden, Celine Dion's song comes on the radio. Um, my heart will go on, I think it's called, and tears start to come down my eyes. And she said, she says to me, "What's wrong?" So I told her, and she was devastated. Ugh, it was the worst feeling.
Yeah.
But the good news is it's non-cancerous, and I had it out over a year ago, and I feel great.
Oh, thank you, Jesus. Um,
Yes.
so tell me, what were the emotions that really went through your whole being? Because these are not emotions that are just in your mind or in your heart. When you are told something that big, I don't want to say it's devastating because it wasn't. It wasn't. You are alive and well and thriving. But what did it feel like when you were given that diagnosis?
And all kinds of emotions went through my mind, and were racing through my mind. But the most important message that I can share with all of your listeners, Marcy, is the fact that I had planned. I had set everything up. I had set up my insurances in case I died or become disabled or critically ill, or and had the updated beneficiary designations and so on, and had passwords recorded so that my wife would know exactly where everything was, because I'm usually in this mindset, knowing that at any point I could all of a sudden be out of the picture or disabled or whatever. But it there wasn't any one emotion, Marcy. There was a pile of them. But I did feel very relieved in the fact that I had already planned a lot of this stuff. I didn't really have much more planning to do. But as
Yeah.
they said on the Monday morning, the ear, nose, and throat specialist said, Greg, don't worry, it's probably an acoustic neuroma, which is non-cancerous. And he was right.
Oh, thank goodness, right? That is so good. And yet what I picked out of what you just said there, that you didn't like I've known a lot of people that have gotten really bad diagnoses that did not turn out the same way that yours did. And in their months of fighting for their life, a lot of their energy had to go to, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out my estate. I've got to figure out my will. I've got to figure out all of these things. Um, before whatever happens is going to happen, right? And so, and I have to tell you, stress is one of the biggest feeders of disease, right? If we're adding extra stress when our body is trying to fight for our lives, we are not doing ourselves any favors. So that's another reason right there to do all of this beforehand.
Yes, and I totally understand the fact that talking about our death or potentially becoming sick or disabled is not something that a lot of people want to discuss. But discussing it is the lesser of two evils, as the old saying goes. It tends, as you said in the bio, it does tend to pull family members closer together if they're a part of this type of conversation about what is to happen and how the estate is to be settled and who gets what and why it's being set up this way. Some lawyers, as an example, are actually even having these types of family meetings and pulling everyone together so that it's openly discussed well in advance, and it's a great idea.
Yeah. And you were saying it brought people together. I think that it makes things real, right? It
Yeah.
really brings the appreciation and understanding that someday, I'm not going to have this person here with me that I love so much. I need to start valuing the time I have. I need to start really focusing on spending time and building memories instead of, just going through life in a rush day by day and missing out on all those times we could have. So I can totally see how that could bring up that awareness, which would lead to spending more time together. That's a really great point. And I love that Dion had something to do with you telling your wife, by the way. I think that's fantastic. So has your wife shared with you how it felt to her when she heard you tell her that diagnosis?
Yeah, she has. She has. She was devastated. She immediately got on the phone and called her employer and said, "I need Monday off to go with Greg. I've just got terrible news." And obviously she came with me and such. But here's another interesting point. Within an hour of telling her, I wanted to clear my head, or we both wanted to, and we ended up going out for a drive or going out somewhere. So she was on the phone with her closest girlfriend, and I wanted to give her some space. So I went out to the vehicle and thinking when she gets off the call, she'll come out and join me and we'll go. And I pulled out my phone and I thought, I'm going to record a little video about what just happened, just in case. I don't know if I'll share it. And then my stepdaughter says to me 2 days before my brain surgery, you know that video you had taken, Greg, just before you told mom about your surgery? Let's put that on TikTok and see what happens. So we did. And she put it on there for me, and it has now been viewed over 1.7 million times.
Wow. Wow. I think that this type of conversation connects to people at their souls because I think in the backs of their minds, even though they don't necessarily they got their heads stuck in the sand a lot of the times, um, they know that that could be them. And at some point, there's going to be someone they care about that's going to have that type of experience. So I can understand why you have that million plus viewing on that video. And what a great idea. Good job. Way to put it out there, because that probably brought a lot of awareness to what you're doing now too.
Well, I've added videos to support all this whole get your affairs in order message, Marcy. But it's kind of interesting that people are. It's ironic, really, that people are interested in that type of situation of me saying, if it is cancerous, I've got some really serious decisions to make, and that's exactly what I said in that video. And you're right, it resonated with people. They were interested in that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, why do the statistics continually, year after year after year, after the funeral industry has been beating the drum, get your affairs in order, the legal industry, the financial planning industry, that the statistics are still, well, they suck, really, to be brutally honest. Not even half the adult population has a current invalid will in place. And that's just not the case in Canada. It's the case in the US and Australia and many other countries.
Yeah, well, it's an unfortunate thing. And I really learned this when I was the public information officer, when I was a police officer, that the news will push out the negative, um, the death aspects, the hurt puppies and children, because we as a society feed on it for some reason. And unfortunately, we feed on it off of someone else's expense, not applying it to our own life and experience, right?
Yeah,
That if we would just take the time to say, oh my gosh, what would I do if I was in that position? What
yeah.
should I do now so that I'm prepared when that situation arises? It's more like we consume it and then it's gone.
Yes.
Yeah, that is unfortunate, and I hope that the What Now tribe is really listening in here, because I think it's really important, everything that you're sharing. And they all know that who I am. They all know that I'm a God girl. They all know that I love Jesus. I'm a Jesus freak, and I know that you and your wife are believers as well. Can you share what part being a Christian played throughout this whole process?
It Being a Christian gave me the faith and hope that I was going to get through this. And if I was destined to die at that point last spring, I became accepting of that. And it was only over that 3-day weekend, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that my wife and I were convinced, I guess, for lack of a better word, or pretty well convinced, that I was given a death sentence. But it gave me, being raised in the church years ago as a young boy and such, and then working in the funeral industry, it certainly reinforces that. Um, Being a Christian, it just gave me that peace of mind.
Yeah. So you mentioned working is, in the funeral profession, I would say even in the death industry, right? That reinforced your beliefs in God. Can you share some examples of why that is?
Well, I regularly worked with clergy, obviously working with hundreds of families at the time of a death, and following through the 2 or 3 days. It was more so 2 or 3 days years ago than it is today, because and I write about this in my book. Our society doesn't place the same value on traditional funerals as in the past. But typically, I would be with that family for 2 or 3 days to get to know the key players quite well, and also the clergy that we dealt with on a regular basis at the funeral home and the local churches. It was just part of uh, the center of my world at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you also have done a lot more than working after someone has passed away. You've been part of hospice for a while. Can you share with us what hospice means to you, why it's important, and just share a story with us about your hospice journey?
Sure. Well, actually, I write about this in my book, and how important and how vitally important hospice services are, and how the whole hospice field is looking to educate the public more so about all of their services, and how critically unique it is, and how there's such a demand for people to help them as volunteers. I've been a volunteer for the local hospice here and very much enjoyed it. And actually, my most recent hospice client passed away about 3 weeks ago. He was in his early 80s. He had health issues, and I got to know him quite well, and actually helped him write out his memoir. He knew I was an author, and I had offered to write out notes, and we spent a fair amount of time doing this. And this was his final message. It meant a lot to him. And he was a very sweet fella, but it broke my heart when he died, and I knew it would happen, obviously, working in the hospice type of world. But I ended up reading to him from the Bible during the last few visits.
Oh, what a beautiful experience and being able to bring him some peace as he's going along and helping to continue his
Yeah.
legacy. That is such a gift that you gave to him. Hospice I think is really quite misunderstood. I think that some people think that it's like that's where you go or they come in when you are like days from dying. Can you explain hospice a little bit better and how
Well,
people can get involved?
yes, yeah, this particular fella actually was admitted to hospice quite some time ago and survived it. And and I joked with him saying we could call your book How I Survived Hospice. We didn't do that ultimately, but we did finish it before he died, which we were both grateful for. But the easiest way to get involved in hospice is to go online and just type in hospice to any search engine, and there'll be all kinds of options come up. And to reach out to them and let them know that you're perhaps interested in helping in one way or another.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that everybody should just at least go and get some information on it because it might be
Yeah.
a really great way that we can give back and help someone, in their final days. We all want to have that love and support and encouragement when it comes to be our time. So why not be
Yeah.
that for someone during theirs? So, okay, let's get back to this legacy planning because that's really what it is it's planning for what legacy you're leaving and the experience you're leaving for those people you love and care about the very most. So, what are the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to their legacy planning?
Not talking about it and not planning for it.
Mm.
The issue of talking about it is really stressed in my book. And that was something, Marcy, that I took a whole lot of the time to try and figure out how I could write a good, compelling book that would inspire people to lean into this and actually enjoy it. And I put some humor in it, although it's dry humor. There is some humor, but all the feedback that I'm getting on it is indicating that it is inspiring people to talk to their families about these things and plan.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, I can't wait to get my copy. I have not had it delivered yet. So I'm looking forward to getting it and reading it because I know that there's always something that we can be doing better. That even if we have something in place, that there's always something more that we could do that could help, alleviate that stress for people after we pass and even alleviate it for us before we do. So can you share maybe what the most important issue is to being prepared? What is the most important thing and most important reason why we need to be?
Having a valid will, Marcy, is the only way of stipulating who we want to wrap up our life, a critically important role. And if we die intestate without a will, the rules where we live therefore apply. So a judge is basically going to appoint someone who likely wouldn't be who you may want to wrap up your life. And it just complicates things, it draws things out, and it can end up in just so many problems taking place, as opposed to having a will and engaging your family in these conversations in advance. But another thing is life insurance.
Mm, yeah, tell us about that.
Okay, I will. I write about this in my book too, that a lot of people don't know where to turn. They don't know how much they should have. They, in some cases, think that their employer group plan is sufficient and that's all they need. But when I worked as a financial advisor and went through a detailed needs analysis with clients, we would often discover, based on the answers they gave back to me, that they were underinsured and they should consider buying more insurance.
Mm. Well, and there's a lot of places that you can actually get some life insurance for very reasonable prices too. So there's really not an excuse.
That's very true, but it's also critically important to be aware of what you're buying. The best type of insurance to buy is the type that asks you a lot of questions up front. In other words, that is called full medical underwriting. Because at the time of a claim, whenever that is, down the road, could be decades down the road, the insurance company is not going to ask really any questions other than proof that the person has died.
Mm.
But the type of insurance that doesn't ask any questions up front, they pretty well approve everybody. You've seen those commercials, right? I'm sure we all have from time to time. Those types of what are called guaranteed issue life insurance contracts, at the time of a claim down the road when someone dies, will have all kinds of questions to be answered. And especially when someone has died, it can be much more challenging at that time.
Yeah,
It's much
creating
more secure and less expensive to do the medical underwriting upfront.
yeah, creating more stress for the people that you love and care about to be able to get what you wanted to provide them with. Yeah. So this process, it's not a really fast process to be able to get everything in place, is it? Can you help explain a little bit about the process and what expectations people should have?
Yes, yes. You know what comes to mind is this image that I have in a PowerPoint presentation that I give called deathbed estate planning, where a cartoon character is having someone in a bed sign a document, which I guess would be a will or something. But you're absolutely right. That type of rushed deathbed estate planning is a bad idea for all kinds of reasons. But you're right. It does take time to put these things in place. I've talked to some people who have actually taken. Well, I remember one woman I spoke to when I worked as a financial planner. She had admitted to me that she had been wanting to put a will together since her daughter was a baby, and her daughter was now driving.
Wow. Yeah. So talking about that, I mean, is there any specific age to where someone should be thinking about this estate planning, or should anybody that has any ownership of anything have all of this in place?
Well, yes, yeah, for the most part, yes. And I know there are some people out there that think they don't really may not have enough to really worry about, or their kids will look after it, or whatever the reasoning is. But think about it this way: if all of a sudden you were in my shoes, and you had a cancerous brain tumor, and it ended up taking you quickly, and all of a sudden you were gone, we all want to make things easier for those that we love and care about. Something as simple as taking our online passwords and writing them down as I'm constantly doing in this binder here for my wife, because if all of a sudden I'm taken out of the picture, I want to make it easier for her. And we've all got online credentials that we're always updating and opening, etc. But that's one simple, quick thing that can be done. And do it in pencil, don't do it in pen.
Right. Because you're going to be changing it frequently. Yeah. Which brings up another
Exactly.
question is how often should we be updating this information that we're putting together in our plan?
Well, the old standard answer to that, Marcy, used to be in regards to a will every 5 years, or if something significant changed. But now with online services and so on, it makes it much more practical and reasonable to be updating this information much more frequently.
Yeah. Technology has done a lot for us, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah. Well, you are giving us so much good information from your book. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that I've made it simple. You can actually go to marcynettles.com/books to be able to pick up Greg's book and help you get on the right track. Plus, Greg has got an amazing freebie that he's offering to all of the listeners of this episode. Just make sure that you go to marcynettles.com/freebies, and we'll make sure that we get you connected to the link to be able to gather his probing legacy questions. So, what are those, Greg? What are your probing legacy questions, and why should the listeners be really excited to get them?
Because the questions will help make it much easier for your listeners to get these conversations started. That's one of the biggest hurdles I have found over the years, Marcy, is that people don't know how to bring this up with family members, and in some cases that I've had financial planning clients go home and attempt to talk to their parents about it, and their parents didn't want to talk about it, so they were shut down. And in other cases, it was the reverse. But I came up with this list of questions in which it consists of 15 basic questions and another 15 advanced questions for more advanced, um, tighter relationships, for lack of a better word, just to help get the conversations going, because they're just starting at the starting point. But that's
Oh,
hopefully will help inspire people to realize that it's really not that hard. It just takes a bit of courage to get these conversations moving.
oh my gosh, you are taking out all of the difficulty. You are taking out all of the ignorance, which by the way, What Now Tribe, ignorance is not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you don't take the information that comes to you and learn from it, because ignorance is just basically something you don't know yet, right? So I'm not calling anybody ignorant. I am just utilizing a term so that you can know that you can go from being ignorant in an area to knowledgeable. And then you can take that knowledge and put it into action, which will then become a power and a benefit for you in your life. Okay. So you can grab Greg's probing legacy questions at marcynettles.com/freebies. Just ask for the freebie from this episode, and we will get you connected to Greg so that you can get everything that you need to get that conversation started. Because again, that's just the first step, but it's the step that most are afraid to do. So we made it easy for you. So that is amazing, Greg. Thank you so much for offering that to all of our listeners here today. So I would really love for you to share how the What Now Tribe can get connected to you, how they can follow you. And then I'd love to have your final words before we close out today.
Okay. The best way, Marcy, for anyone to connect with me is through my website, which is basically copied after the title of my book. But the website is do not ignore your mortality.com. And in order to connect with me, that there's places there that people can do that. But if people are interested in those probing legacy questions, we simply just ask for their name and email address, and that gives us a way of staying in touch occasionally. Here's just one example. In my bio, you mentioned the fact that this planning process, Marcy, helps reduce the stress of aging, which is vitally important. It helps survivors be more resilient. It helps charities. It helps create more meaningful legacies. It leaves our family in a position of strength ultimately when we go. And it also takes a huge pressure off the court system from having to deal with so many unorganized estates, therefore helping the economy. No, I don't think anyone could really argue with that. But it's really a matter of leaning into this. And what I'm wanting to do is just stay in touch with people as I have been. And on LinkedIn, I'm finding a lot of people from these various fields saying, Greg, although this information is not new, you've got a very intriguing approach here, and we want to stay in touch and keep abreast of you sharing this message.
Yeah, information is power when you put action behind it. So please, everybody, go and gather those probing legacy questions for yourself. Start the conversations. And again, marcynettles.com/freebies to gather those. And I will get you connected to Greg. And Greg, he's not going to spam you, he's not going to send you emails constantly. This is going to be an educational process that's going to help empower you into making the right decisions for the rest of your life. Okay. And I don't mean he's going to help you with every situation that comes up in your life. I'm just saying he's going to help you make some of the most important decisions that you will make in your lifetime by getting those emails from him. So, Greg, I appreciate you so very much. Thank you so much for being such an amazing guest today. The you know, the things that we've talked about are so important. It helps families come closer together. It helps the stress of losing a loved one become easier. I mean, more simple. It's never easy, right? Yet we can put this information into somebody's hands and help them have a better outcome after their loved one has passed. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome, Marcy. And one other quick point, I don't provide one-on-one advice to anyone anymore. My plate is full just spreading and sharing this important message, which I'm hoping to do with as many people as possible. But the book inspires people, readers and listeners, to reach out to others that can help them, good financial planners, good lawyers, and so on. And it doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money to do it either.
Oh, that's a really good point, by the way, because a lot of people think that it could be really expensive to be able to have all of their life in order or end of life information in order. So there is places that they can go. So thank you for that. And by the way, you did the best thing possible to be able to get out to the most people. You wrote a book. So What Now Tribe, go grab his book, marcynettles.com/books. Thank you so much, Greg. You're amazing.
Thank you.